Welcome back to Satan's Trilogy. This is reading number 7. Mr. Hung then excused himself. He had customers walking into the restaurant. Dinner hour was approaching and soon they would be very busy. Brandy looked at Esther and asked, "Don't we get a check?" Esther said, "My uncle would be offended if we even left a tip. It was an unexpected joy for him to serve us." Standing up, Esther said, "Well, now I am stuffed. The only thing left that I need is sleep. I'm afraid that traveling halfway around the world and getting only a few hours of sleep is catching up with me. Would you mind if we went home so that I can collapse? I might not wake up for a very long time." Esther laughed, and a sigh of exhaustion was released, though unintentionally. Brandy suddenly realized that Esther was entitled to be dead on her feet. "You poor girl. You look absolutely exhausted. Of course we can go home." The restaurant was filling up with customers. As they walked out, Mr. Hung waved goodbye while showing a couple to their table. Brandy and Esther got back into the car and drove to her apartment. Esther was exhausted, and though the time was still rather early, she was feeling severe jet lag. The large concrete parking lot was nearly full, but fortunately, the tenants had assigned parking spaces. Brandy parked the car and told Esther her apartment was only a short distance. Esther grabbed her suitcase from where she had tossed it into the back seat. Walking down a sidewalk, the two entered a hallway where Brandy's apartment was only 2 doors down. Brandy opened the door and started to apologize for the appearance of the apartment, but Esther had dropped her bag at the door and found the sofa. Quickly removing her shoes and jacket, Esther laid down and was instantly asleep. Brandy found a blanket and covered Esther. She then brought a pillow from her bed and placed it under Esther's head. Esther had collapsed, and Brandy wasn't certain when she would wake up, but fortunately tomorrow was Saturday, and she had planned on sleeping late herself. Brandy put Esther's travel bag at the end of the sofa, picked up a few clothes left lying about, and went to her bedroom. She decided to leave the hallway light on just in case Esther woke up looking for the bathroom. The next morning, Brandy heard some sounds from inside her living room. She looked at the clock, and it was 6 a.m. She couldn't believe that Esther would be up at such an early hour, but the sounds indicated otherwise. Brandy slowly crawled out of bed and made her way to the bathroom, just outside her bedroom. She then pulled on her bathrobe and went back to the hallway. As she neared the living room and became more awake, she was confronted with magnificent smells of breakfast. Easily, bacon could be detected in the air and perhaps some hash browns. It was only a few steps to her living room, but Brandy wasn't ready for what she saw. The entire living area looked clean, picked up and clean. Everything was sort of bright. Esther was in the kitchen, cooking some bacon and an entire breakfast. She turned around and said, "Good morning, Aunt Brandy. I hope you are hungry. I woke up with a huge appetite. I went down the street this morning and met the most wonderful grocery store owner. His name is Chen Ho. Do you know him? He is Korean and came to this country just 18 years ago. He sold me the very best of bacon and eggs at a great price. I speak Korean, and so we got along really well. He has a daughter my age, but she wasn't there." Esther's hair was pulled back into a ponytail. She was wearing a simple white tank top with some white shorts. The shorts were a respectable length, but her legs were so long that she still had ample legs showing. Esther was physically fit, and it was easily seen that her legs, while being slender, had solid muscle tone. Even Esther's arms showed well-developed biceps and overall muscle tone. Brandy stood at the hallway in disbelief, then said, "Oh my God, it all smells so good." Then her thoughts changed as she announced, "I need some coffee." Coming right up. Esther had already reached for the pot of coffee, poured a cup, and handed it to Brandy, meeting her halfway across the room. "I noticed you had this great coffee maker, but no coffee beans to use in it. This coffee is made from Jamaican coffee beans. It should be a wonderful cup of coffee. I wasn't certain about your thoughts on decaf beans, but Dad always said removing the caffeine is a sin. I have to agree. How about you?" Esther finally stopped talking and looked at Brandy, taking her first sip of coffee. "Oh my God, this is heavenly." Brandy's eyes opened a bit larger, and she said, "Caffeine is the soul of the bean. They belong together." Looking at Esther, they both started to laugh at Brandy's bit of philosophy. Esther stopped talking for a moment, realizing that Brandy wasn't entirely awake. "And Brandy, I know you must be hungry. Please sit down. I have some wonderful food for you." Esther helped her aunt find the chair at the small table just off the kitchen, then returned to the kitchen. She slid several items onto two large plates from several skillets and then walked over to Brandy. "I hope you'll like this," said Esther. Brandy looked at the plate in front of her and she couldn't believe her eyes. The most beautiful presentation of food she had ever seen. Scrambled eggs with red diced pepper, bacon that was sugared, and some country-cut potatoes with onion and green pepper diced into them. In a basket, some whole wheat toast, lightly buttered. Esther saw Brandy looking at the toast, and so she commented, "Dad told me no breakfast was ever complete without buttered toast, and so I prepared some in his honor." Brandy was speechless for a moment. "Esther, this is all so wonderful. I don't know what to say." Esther looked at her aunt and said, "Well, I suggest we eat, and if you enjoy breakfast, let me know. We cooks can be a bit vain, you know." Esther smiled and started to eat. She was very hungry, having waited for her aunt to join her for breakfast. Brandy took a bite and another and another. "This is really, really good," she said, and continued to eat. Few words were spoken during breakfast. Both ladies were enjoying the meal. Esther had been up for several hours, enjoying a fantastic morning and exploring a small amount of the neighborhood. She had straightened up the living room where she had collapsed on the sofa. Esther was an early morning riser and didn't need a lot of sleep. Having taken care of certain issues that needed attention, Esther was wide awake by the time Brandy awoke. At the nursing home, Mary had mentioned that she was an early riser, a result from her military life. Esther had phoned her to get the name of the attorney she had found for the heartbroken German. After some discussion, Esther had learned the German would be released in 3 days from a local hospital. There was another surprise that Esther was going to show her aunt later in the day. It had been a very productive morning of phone calls. "Aunt Brandy, I'm sorry for collapsing on the sofa last night. I've never experienced jet lag like that before. I couldn't believe how exhausted I was after finally having that fantastic dinner prepared at Uncle Hung's restaurant." Brandy looked at Esther and said, "Well, first of all, breakfast was kick-ass, and secondly, you don't need to apologize for being exhausted after flying halfway across the world to find me. I just can't believe that you woke up before me." Esther finished her last bite of scrambled egg and said, "And Brandy, I usually need only 4 hours of sleep a night. I've always been an early riser. I am a little surprised that I woke up this morning as early as I did, but then I did fall asleep early last night. Thanks for covering me with the blanket." Brandy looked at Esther and said, "You are as amazing as your dad said you were. He always had something to say about you that seemed a bit astonishing, and now I know why." Esther looked a bit embarrassed at the flattery, but then replied to her aunt, "I need to share something with you that I tell very few people. Dad had me tested when I was only 6 years old. My learning and reasoning ability was scored on a Weinstein intelligence test. I was tested 910 out of possible 999. Few people have ever scored that high." Esther, looking at Brandy, smiled and then laughed. "It seems I learn very easily, and I seldom forget what I learn. This is why I am fluent in 6 languages. Of course, you learn a country's language much faster when you live there, and I had that advantage many times. I have never had a problem with learning languages, and with Dad and me traveling to many countries, I had advantages in perfecting each language." Pausing a moment, Esther looked for a response from Brandy. Esther saw that Brandy was trying to process it all, and so she continued, "Dad also had me study martial arts with many teachers. I mastered 5 schools of martial arts. Dad wanted me to be ready for the day I would have to defend not only myself but others." Taking a drink of water, Esther looked Brandy in the eyes. She then laughed. "And Brandy, I am able to protect myself easily. What I want you to understand, though, is something my teacher told me. An umbrella can only offer so much protection." Esther laughed, took another sip of water, and continued, "Dad sometimes was a bit mysterious, and perhaps hard to understand. But he was the wisest person I have ever known, and I have known many wise people." Esther stopped talking and looked at her aunt. "And Brandy, Dad wanted me to tell you something. He said that he would watch over you through me." Esther lowered her eyes for a moment. "And Brandy, Dad knew that one day he might not survive the mission, and he had told me to be strong when and if that day came. He used to tell me that life is for today, and tomorrow is not to be lost in the past." Esther looked at her aunt and, with the most sincere expression one might imagine, said to her aunt, "You and I must go on. There's a lot of life yet to be lived. That's the way Dad would have wanted it." Brandy took Esther's hand and said, "Your dad and I had a bond that can never be broken. We'll move on. His memory will live through the 2 of us." Brandy fought back some tears and then avoided them by changing the subject. "I imagine that you have a lot to do. Have you planned out your day?" asked Brandy. Esther moved a bit in her chair, straightening herself in the chair, and said, "Well, Dad wanted me to go to Grant High, and to attend this senior prom. He told me that it was a great school and that the 2 of you had some awesome times while at Grant. He told me that if the opportunity ever came along for me to attend a high school in the States, I should take it. I was thinking that I could attend Ulysses S. Grant High School. I'll only need to attend the 2nd semester to graduate, and should be an interesting experience. All of my schooling has been from private tutors. It's only for 6 months, and then I can find a full-time job or maybe find a college. I hear there's a really good junior college close by. Or I might consider a career in cooking. Esther started to appear excited as she spoke. Preparing food for people is so rewarding. I just love it. Esther sat back with a smile on her face. Esther continued, I've had many tutors forward my course history to the high school. I took care of that before leaving Hong Kong. They should have them by now. I imagine they'll want to test me, but after satisfying their screening, I can register and complete my senior year. Esther then had a thought. Oh, and I guess I should shop for some clothes. My luggage hasn't arrived yet, and I'll be attending school on Monday when the second semester starts. Brandy perked up. Esther, you are talking to the world's most passionate clothes shopper, and we'll have to start right away. The store is open in 1 hour, and we have a lot to do. Brandy jumped up from the table. I'll go shower and be ready in 20 minutes. She then hesitated and looked at the kitchen. Esther was reading her mind and said, Don't worry about the kitchen, Aunt Brandy. Every great cook knows that keeping the kitchen clean is half the job. I'll have the dishes done before you have picked out your day's clothes. Esther laughed and turned towards the kitchen. Deal, said Brandy, and she was quickly off to her bedroom. Brandy took a fast shower and then put some blue jeans on. Tight fitting with a button up front, she also chose a white cotton shirt, short sleeve, and finally a light green jacket made from a wool blend that had a silk green liner, which Brandy thought extra nice. By the time Brandy came out of her bedroom, Esther had washed the dishes and had finished the Hong Kong newspaper she purchased at Chen's grocery. Esther stood up when she saw her aunt, commenting, Wow, you look good in street clothes. Yesterday, Brandy had her nurse's uniform on, and it didn't really say much in fashion.